We could offer to lease the rooftop of our customer. Adjacent land had no beneficial use. Stranded real estate from our customers and provide them with a fixed value. So just a 20-year rent. And for some reason, that was easier for C&I customers to get their heads wrapped around than the risk additive nature in their mind of stepping out there for a 20-year purchase of power.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I have Gabe Phillips. He's the CEO at Catalyst Power Holdings. Gabe, welcome to the podcast. It's great having you. It's always a small world in the energy industry, especially the energy and renewables industry in the New York City tri-state area. Gabe, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to speak to you because I think you could provide a lot of interesting perspective on a lot of different topics that are happening right now in the industry. So thank you, Gabe.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for a while. And you're right, the world in energy is small. It's smaller in renewables and smaller still in the tri-state area. And as I get older, it feels like the world is collapsing on me a little.
I mean, it's crazy to think that we were communicating like 13 years ago about rec stuff. And now it's coming back to me because we did talk about some renewable energy credit stuff. And that's amazing that you look back all these years later through your emails before you go and speak to someone. So
it's always good to have the context because, like I said, the more miles behind me here, the more chances I've had to bump into somebody. And I always make sure that I did my best to give them a good experience last time.
Yeah. I actually had a good experience the last time we met. I know I mentioned we met with Daryl Pylon when you were with GP Renewables and I was helping Standard Solar, and Daryl was the head of business development. What I could tell you from that meeting, I didn't really talk that much. Like Daryl was doing most of the talking. It was only supposed to be a 30-minute meeting, and I think it went to like an hour and a half. And I loved how you were like teaching about like the energy markets and like the different things that GP Renewables, how it could be like a strategic partnership. And I think you had some projects as well. So like I actually learned a lot from that meeting. And I think obviously energy is so complicated and there's so many different aspects of it and you're doing it for so many years. The other thing too, I think you really bring a unique perspective because your experience is not just in renewables. It's, energy in total. And that really complements like you understanding the markets and how renewables could come into it. It would be great, actually, Gabe, if you could first tell us about Catalyst Power, but then also your extensive experience since college that you've been in the energy industry at Sempra.
Funny you mentioned Standard Solar, though. I mean, my first solar project that I bought in 2012 was from Standard Solar when they were like a small C&I developer, like in the Mid-Atlantic, and then I found myself a year or two ago at a ribbon cutting for a large community solar asset that they owned in upstate New York that Catalyst had aggregated the subscribers on. And I'm standing there next to the CEO and I'm like, do you remember when we did that deal like 10 years ago? The world is small. And it's amazing how far they've come, right?
Wider too. Yeah, I know Scott really well.
Yeah. I mean, I was like standing next to Scott. I'm like, this is insane that we're doing this now after doing that, in 2012. I was like, yes, it is insane. And here we are as part of Brookfield. And it's like, yeah, the world is tiny. I've always felt that no matter what corner of the energy markets you participate in, you should have a broad context of how the whole complex operates. And underpinning the entirety of the complex is price and how prices get formed throughout most of the US in these, deregulated markets are from the ISO administered power markets. And that underpins what someone's willing to pay for a PPA. Even if it's a 25-year deal and there's liquidity in the markets in only 2 or 3 years, it all is still part of the same ecosystem. And so if you don't get the whole bookends of it, you're missing some context that will inform how you might make a decision in the corner that you focus most of your efforts on. So like most of my life, I found myself being a jack of all trades in energy and an ace of none, which might be good or bad, but just the fact of the matter. And I started off, right out of school at Sempra Energy Trading, which had been AIG Energy and Sempra Energy Trading, which was deregulated subsidiary of the California Utility Holding Company that owns San Diego Gas and Electric and Southern California Gas and a whole bunch of other large businesses. And it was a really interesting experience. I started off in the IT department, like clerking for the trade desk, helping them understand their systems. And I did credit. And in credit, I saw how the guts of a transaction work financially. Like, when I do a transaction with you, whether it's a 5-year sale of power from me to you, there's a credit consideration involved. And how does that work with margining and what agreements are involved? And just the whole financial aspect of the transaction part of the world was like a crash course in credit. I ran the margin desk, which was really neat. And I saw that power was the most complicated of the commodities that we were touching. I'm a nerd, so I figured complicated is good for me. I should go beg for a job on that desk. And so I did. I said, I'll sweep the floors, I'll do anything. And so the West Coast managing director eventually put me on the real time desk, which is 24/7 work. And so it's a shift. I met my now wife then, and she was like, sorry, what? You work on Saturday night in the middle of the night? That's weird. Like, what kind of job is that? But every hour of the day is a futures market you can trade in power. And so the real time markets are essentially that. They're hourly or packages of hours, and sometimes the next day. And in the West Coast markets, it was like a lot of work outside of the California ISO and then some inside the Cal ISO. When I started, we were still locked out of the Cal ISO from like legacy Enron related shenanigans that Semper had been involved with. And so I really had to just wheel power around the Western Interconnect without dealing with an ISO at first. And so tagging power on NERC tags and faxing them to transmission operators was like a big part of my job. And yes, I said faxing for all of your listeners who are under 30. They're like, what's that? I get to use Netscape to schedule things, like really old school stuff. But it was cool to have been part of like the physical markets, like day one when I got into the markets, but also understand like the transmission system and how the physical aspects of the market meet the financial aspects of the market. Dealing with generators, we ran power plants and got into like really like what you see when you come out from behind a screen, right? Like the real parts of the power world. And then I moved to the East Desk and I traded financial power and eventually ended up sort of in charge of the Northeastern markets for Sempra for a time. So New York, New England, PJM, MISO, Ontario, and the Southeast. And that was like crash course in every deregulated power market in the country, basically, in those 5-year span that I worked there. I mean, from Canada to Mexico, I've touched every power market from a wholesale trading perspective. And then all these new market participants were like, I got to use the market to meet a business need. I'm a developer. I need to sell power. I'm a new retail supplier. I need to buy power. And I don't know how to do any of it. And so I left trading for profit and started to help people trade to meet their business need. And that's what GP Energy Management, which is eventually what it became known as, the business that I set up to do that. And there I got exposure to all the rest of the power market world that I hadn't really seen in my seat as a trader. So the developers and their considerations and how they would, what aspects of a long-term contract would matter for their financing needs. And on the retail side, like I saw all the good, the bad, and lots of the ugly of that market as well. And happened to just have this front row seat to what was missing from both perspectives. The development community and the retailer world focused really well on the bookends of the markets, the end users that are residential, basically the mass market residential consumer got all kinds of options for retail power, retail gas, on-site generation, renewables, backup power, whatever they wanted was like available because there was a cookie cutter aspect to their transactions. And then like the very large, the mush sector and the public company world that was sophisticated got a lot of attention too. So lots of attention developing multi-megawatt projects, whether they're gas-fired or solar or whatever, or utility scale development, got tons of attention. But in the middle, the C&I markets were largely ignored. And, there's good reason for that. They're a pain in the butt to do business with. And, their attention span for their energy consumption is a lot smaller than its economic impact on their businesses. And their lack of sophistication with financial instruments and forward transactions, because they're busy focused on their business, whatever that might be, surely not in the energy business. And so that left a gap in the market I wanted to fill. And I figured the only way to do that was to occupy their mind share entirely associated with energy. So be their retail supplier, be their broker, be their project development partner, be their EV charging, infrastructure sales partner, be their everything related to energy. And so far, that's really what we do here at Catalyst. That's what I formed Catalyst to do. I exited GP to Genscape, and ultimately in 2019 I left, and by 2020 we were funded with a private equity sponsor, and we got to work building the platform that is Catalyst Power now, focused on that customer segment that had been ignored, to do all of those things and give them one neck to strangle, like one-stop shopping. Probably better way to, my marketing guy would yell at me for saying it that way. A better way to put that is one-stop shopping for all of their energy and decarbonization needs. My job is serve that customer with lots of options, but my goal in doing this is to decarbonize the C&I sector. Like, that's been too hard for everybody else who's been out there decarbonizing our energy markets to figure out. And I think I've got a better mousetrap for doing that and starting to bear out here over the last couple of years. So that's what we're doing here at Catalyst. That's how I got here. Sorry for the long-winded answer to your question.
No, that was great. I appreciate you going into the detail and You know what's amazing is it's a one-stop shop. Obviously, you mentioned this like with CNI, the customer segment, they don't necessarily have like an energy team, right, to understand all the different value propositions that there can be. And what you're offering, I think, is a huge value without them having it in-house and being able to decarbonize, which is a lot of, CNI customers are looking to and having renewable energy goals. The other thing too, hearing your background is like, wow, like there's so much knowledge that you have about the US energy markets. And I'm sure it's like so interesting for you to see like, I know actually a lot about what happened with Enron and, trying to move power and during that crazy time period of electricity prices being really high and California trying to become a deregulated market and then basically staying regulated because of Enron. And then now you're talking about almost like 15 to 20, I forget when that was, 15 to 20 years later. And it's still a regulated market versus like the deregulated markets. And yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how much you've learned from that. And it was interesting as well, like how small of a world it is when you mentioned Standard Solar, when they were just like Mid-Atlantic EPC, now like, they now are owned by Brookfield and they have a lot of assets under management. And then you're doing like the community solar customer aggregation. I think it would be like really helpful too to talk about like the different sort of service offerings that you offer at Catalyst Power. And then also too, like maybe if our audience is not familiar, like what's community solar, obviously, different states, it's different. And what is like customer aggregation as well? I know you obviously do a lot more than that. There's like as part of your decarbonization strategy, but it would be great to get high level, like of the different components of Catalyst Power.
The community solar customer aggregation was actually like stop one on our tour from like supply to like the next thing that was going to be
Mm.
sold to the same customer that was decarbonizing. And it worked so well for us because C&I customers, at least the middle market that we focus on, those that are not public companies with like stated goals for decarbonization, as much as I wish this wasn't the case, that's not a priority for them. And they're certainly not going to pay premiums to decarbonize themselves. They need to see, like, you got to show them the money. They're coin operated. And so community solar was great in that it was a guaranteed discount to whatever their costs were for however long they were subscribed to a project. As much as New York can be selfish and different in many ways from other states, they did the community solar construct best, in my opinion, compared to every other state that has developed one thus far. It's been relatively simple. The utility nets the customer bill, and so they're not getting two invoices, and they're just left with the value from being a subscriber. So I guess, community solar, the best way to put it is remote solar. It's not on-site access to solar, except most markets have structured it as a bill credit subscription rather than a physical commodity supply. So even though it's remote and it goes into the same utility system that you as a customer is connected to, there's no transfer of title of physical kilowatts. There's no electrons moving from asset to customer. It's just the bill credit that's produced by the solar array. In most markets, it's set up this way. In order for the solar array owner to access some portion of those bill credits, they have to have subscribers who get to keep some of those bill credits first. That's like the best way I can describe it. It's more of a financial transaction than a physical one. And that does provide like a democratization of access, which I think is really valuable. And I like that in New York, even though they have this like mass market and non-mass market customer requirement for a community solar asset subscriber base to meet, they permit a lot of commercial entities to occupy both sides of that ledger if they're small enough, or if they have non-demand meters on the mass market side, or they're multiple unit dwellings. They have like a bunch of different carve outs that allow an asset to subscribe its entire base of customer credits to commercial entities if they want, to residential and commercial. They provided some additional flexibility there that I haven't seen in other community solar constructs.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. I mean, and how the New York community solar market is a good market and that CNI could basically, obviously they could have a project right on their rooftop, but then also take a benefit of the supply and use that for their own use. Pretty
What I
amazing.
like about it also as a supplier, there's no interaction with the physical commodity consumption of a customer. Like for a long time in my last business, I tried to convince my retail supplier clients that I helped manage their books to partner with community solar people and cross sell subscriptions to their customers. And they were always bent out of shape. Am I going to lose volume if I do that? I don't want to. And it's a bill credit transaction, so you don't lose any volume there. The customer just gets a benefit by being a solar subscriber, which obviously helps the solar asset get built, and there's all the knock-on benefits associated with that. And then I figured, okay, after that stop on the tour, that's like the lowest touch,
Yeah.
sort of simplest, but like most minimal value delivered to a customer via a solar asset, that we would start building assets at our customers' sites that we would develop and own and operate, and under PPA structures with our customers, do a long-term power purchase agreement. Because if you're a consumer of power, you wake up in the morning and you're short the commodity price, meaning if it goes up, you are experience pain. And if it goes down, you experience benefit. That's the definition of being short something. But
Yeah.
for some reason, our customers that we pitched a long-term PPA to, they didn't view that, even if it was only going to produce half of their needs or something, or less than half of that, as a hedge against that short position that they have when they wake up every morning. They viewed it as
Oh,
like risk additive, not risk reducing. It was troublesome for me to get my head wrapped around because it's not accurate. But they're like, what if I step out there and I overpaid for something and it gets cheaper in the future? And I'm like, I can't help you there. It's a hedge. That's what hedges do. You take risk off the table. But in New York, because of their community solar construct, and now we found in a lot of other markets, there's like a way to do it this way too. We could offer to lease the rooftop of our customer, adjacent land that had no beneficial use, stranded real estate from our customers, and provide them with a fixed value, so just a 20-year rent. And for some reason, that was easier for C&I customers to get their heads wrapped around than the risk additive nature in their mind of stepping out there for a 20-year purchase of power. I mean, look, I've been an entrepreneur since 2010. I've never signed an office lease longer than 24 months. I get it. Like, I get it. Long-term decisions are really hard when you're an entrepreneur. You don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. So they were comfortable signing up to get paid for 20 years, not to pay for something. So our development efforts then, after community solar aggregation, became leasing rooftops from our customers. And we've done several small community solar assets like that in New York that we, lease the rooftop from one customer. They subscribe, which actually in New York City, because of local N97, as the host and subscriber, they get benefits against their local N97 compliance obligations. Unpack more of local N97 if you want. But that's one way that we're playing in that new marketplace. But like in Connecticut, they have these in front of the meter, auctions, the NRES auctions that we've got 6 project awards in now. And in Massachusetts, under the new SMART program, which is more lucrative even than the last SMART program, you're better off doing in front of the meter stuff anyway. In Pennsylvania with net metering, in front of the meter works better than behind the meter. So frankly, like, our customers are happier getting paid for a long time. They don't have to wrap their heads around a long-term power purchase. And it actually, like, the markets were designed to be more conducive to, these distributed in front of the meter projects, meaning they're producing power outside of the customer's fence, right? Like outside of their premises, not consumed on site. Then they were designed to be behind the meter. Connecticut's actually like can't do a third party owned behind the meter asset. The way they structured it's like almost impossible. I know you know Connecticut well enough from your own experience. I mean, it's way easier doing these sub 200 kilowatt NRES projects than anything else.
oh yeah, definitely. It's interesting because, right, but it's really the market rules, these local markets, and really understanding it, the people who are successful. And it's interesting how front of the meter has gotten really popular. And obviously, like, programs like the SMART program is allowing more development of solar in Massachusetts, and local 97 as well, which requires solar on new rooftops, right, in New York City as part of it. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, stuff that I think our audience would be very interested in. And it's interesting because when community solar first came out, financiers were basically looking for a 20-year offtake from both the residential and commercial industrial customer. And obviously, most people don't want to sign a 20-year agreement. And it's interesting how, like, basically the financing community for community solar has been comfortable with, like, no commitment, and then basically, which
Some
I,
aging had to happen there. Some projects had to age for everybody to realize that there's subscribers behind those that you lose, right?
yeah, churn with who you work with.
We've been hired to do churn replacement for a bunch of aggregators actually as a subcontractor.
Oh, interesting.
Specifically in New York, we have in our book of customers, we have a long list of people that would happily sign up for projects when they become available.
That's really interesting. And I appreciate you talking about that. And, obviously in New York City, people are talking about like Law 97. Can you talk about like what that is? And I guess how it sounds like you've been focused more on that space through community solar. for your customers hosting a system, right? And then as a community solar project, and then them using the subscribing as well to the own system, and then obviously excess generation of the system going to other subscribers in Con Ed service territory.
Part of the local N97 story I want to tell requires us to unpack what VEDR is in New York for like a quick second. It's really, I promise. So VEDR is the value of distributed energy resources, and it's the credit that you get that you create when you make a kilowatt hour of community solar production anywhere in the state. And it's different in every little utility territory because one component of it is the wholesale power price, the LMP in that market. So you actually have like wholesale power markets exposure as a community solar asset owner in the state of New York. That's one thing that's worth noting. The other piece of it is demand reduction value. There's a capacity market component to that. And then there's the E value, the environmental attribute, the REC, right? That you are disaggregating and selling to your interconnecting utility. So like if I were to build like a small community solar project on like a building in Staten Island in New York City, I have now, in order to elect to take the E value to maximize VEDR for myself, I am now conveying the environmental attributes to Con Ed. They're buying them. They're buying the RECs from me. So that would mean, hypothetically, that a subscriber to that community solar array is simply a bill credit recipient. They are not a renewable energy bill credit recipient because the aspect of that kilowatt hour that was renewable was sold to Con Ed.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's not available to the customer any longer. But Local 97 explicitly permitted remote solar to contribute to a customer's reduction in their carbon intensity, which is the main thrust of that law. You have a carbon score. If you don't reduce it, penalties are assessed, right? It's the stick, not the carrot. That's the gig. I don't think it's terribly as effective as a carrot can be personally, but that's my view. I've written about that a few times. I've probably ruffled some feathers, but whatever. It's the stick. It's there, but permitted. This is nuts. At least the mayor's office like put out guidance on this. They permit the double counting of the environmental attribute.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know that.
So if you're a subscriber to a community solar asset, either that you host on your own roof as a landlord, and then you just subscribe to it, or you subscribe to somebody else's community solar project anywhere in Con Ed footprint, you can claim those kilowatt hours against your own kilowatt hours of dirty power consumption, thereby reducing your carbon score and avoiding penalties. And they know full well that that is a double counting of the environmental attribute, but they're cool with it because they already know it's so freaking hard to comply with this law anyway. They're like, anything they can do to make it easier, they were going to do. I thought that was really fascinating when I stumbled on that. I had all these calls with the New York Accelerator in the mayor's office about it over the last several years. And yeah, a kilowatt hour of solar production, even remote, gets a particular amount of carbon intensity reduction, and you can claim that as a subscriber.
That's really interesting. Like I had no idea about that. I've never heard of like a double counting of the environmental attribute. And I've heard obviously local law 97, it's hard to obviously meet the goals that they have. And that's really interesting. And I appreciate you providing that intel.
My pleasure. Other things that you can do to reduce carbon intensity would like be, like boiler changeouts, right? Like you've got a dirtier boiler that's inefficient, it's on oil. You can switch to natural gas. That can be expensive sometimes. You could switch to cogen, which is even better from a thermal efficiency perspective. And so we figured, we shouldn't be a solar only developer alongside our retail business and community solar aggregation business. We should add something extra complicated to the mix. And so we started a partnership in cogeneration, specifically in New York and New Jersey first, a partner called OHA Power. So we have a joint venture with them. And then they're the experts. They're the boiler room guys. They're in their dirty fingernails. Like they get the whole thing. And they serve up these opportunities for us, fully engineered, which is key because these are like bespoke designs that are tied into HVAC systems, right? As boiler replacement, right? Cooling, chilling tower stuff, like all that's part of a cogen system. And then there's the cogen module itself, which the electricity production is really like a byproduct of the thermal production. Like they're sized to provide heating value at a more efficient gas consumption rate than a boiler. Then they also make power. And the waste heat from the power generation is what they're using for the heating and or cooling, depending on if they're using absorption chiller or heat pumps or not. And then the power is a byproduct. And that's a baseload power production asset that undercuts all the other costs at a super high thermal efficiency, which is way more decarbonizing on the grid than like a large standalone generation asset is. So we got behind it because it's decarbonizing. And C&I is the focus for that asset class almost exclusively, although I did own an 80 megawatt cogen plant some years ago in Pennsylvania that was selling power to the New York guys. Didn't work out that well. That's a different story for another day. You had a nice steam host in that case. But in any event, these smaller cogen plants are also decarbonizing. They're helpful for local I-97 compliance as well. Even though
Oh,
they're
that
gas hookups, they are still decarbonizing and they reduce that footprint, which avoids penalties.
Yeah, that is really interesting with local law 97 and code generation that it applies as well. I've heard from some people that they've said like, everyone was talking about local law 97 opportunity, how it's a great business opportunity, a lot of business through it. But I've also heard now like feedback that it's way too challenging and that the New York City government's probably going to change like local law 97. I don't know like if you've like encountered these discussions. I've talked to, real estate owners of buildings and they're not as concerned as meeting the qualifications required under local law 97.
That's exactly what I've observed. As much as we can come up with all these creative solutions for compliance, and there are people paying penalties this June for real.
Oh, okay.
It's real. It's coming up here. But I think the view largely is that, you'd have to deploy so many heat pump conversions, whatever their, blunt instrument would be for compliance. Like you'd have to do like 3 a day for the rest of the time for like to
Yeah.
comply to get all the buildings to convert. It's just like impossible for like the city to actually make it happen. And
Yeah.
I don't think they have the administrative like infrastructure to actually like enforce this.
Yeah.
It's insane. And I do think because of that, they must change it. As much as we do find ourselves doing work in New York because of it, it's not the biggest pull in our business by customers. It's a push that we try to put out there, but it's not as big of a pull as some of the other carrot level incentives tend to be. A lot of building owners in New York City are like cavalier and they're like, dude, hit me with a bill. So let's see if you ever even show up with a bill. Or they're like find ways to sort of delay. Oh, I've got enough low income, tenants. I can delay my compliance till 28, 29. Like there's all these carve outs in it. And I think that that's the game that people are playing. Like, do just enough capital improvements to like not hit. I don't know enough about how to avoid the penalties as I do how to comply with them. And but I know there's much more focus in markets where there's big carrots, like Massachusetts, where there's a huge smart 3.0 incentive. It's a high price. You can pay a lot for someone's roof. People are like very active with my team there. People
Oh,
are
but
very active with my team, in New Jersey with, the SUSI program. It just
yeah.
provides so much value. You can offer somebody, a really steeply discounted PPA there, like still, even though it's not SREX of old, but you can provide a lot of value to somebody that makes it really easy to say yes to hosting something. CNI customers get, I think, first stopped dead in their tracks with like the complexity of hosting someone else's equipment on their premises, right? Like that's just them inherently risky. Like, what do you mean you're gonna go up on my roof whenever you need to your solar array? Like, what do you mean you're gonna be in my boiler room tying into my heating systems? And that just gets, individual business owners bent out of shape for good reason. They have to get comfortable with that construct. And I think if the discounts or the value is really steep, the carrot is huge, they're way more willing to say yes and go through the brain damage of getting comfortable with that than they are if it's like a stick that they're just trying to run away from.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and that's great to understand like which markets Catalyst Power's like focused on. And it's interesting because you make a great point. Like obviously, New Jersey had a very high SREC value, and now with the Susie Rex, obviously it's lower, but at the same time, now it's like a guaranteed, 10 years versus like maybe the longest you could get with the SREC Forward is 3 to 5 years. I know there are prepays and just like too with the smart program as well, the long-term certainty of the environmental commodity has allowed deep discounts in the power price, right? The customer is going to pay. So they're willing to do, the extra work that's required to be able to take those incentives. So
The commodity marketing business that I had before this, for developers was all surrounding how do I get long-term offtake agreements for the various commodities that a plant can produce, RECs, power, capacity, ancillaries, whatever they are, for financing purposes. And the development world would always gladly accept a discount on the spot market to get a long-term contract. And that discount could be really steep, as we see today, where the SUSI is relative to, where spot market SREX used to be. But that understanding gap between like, well, the spot market's at $600, therefore that must be what it is forever. And the fact that that's not a futures contract, that's just like a spot market deal. And, that's dynamic. And like, there is a market that tells you what it's worth in the future. You just have to know how to interact with it. Was like always wild that even like developers putting huge dollar figures to work didn't have a deep understanding of. And that just takes us back to the first question you asked. Like, I think everything gets stitched together. You have to understand how futures markets work. Like, if I do a 10-year offtake agreement for power and Rex, how is my buyer going to view my credit? And will they margin me? And do we have a netting agreement that permits that and other transactions to work with one another and net against those risks? And all of those things that have come from the wholesale trading world also apply in the development world. And oh yeah, as a community solar developer in New York, you have wholesale power market exposure. So you better understand where that is. And you should know where the LMPs are trading, not like yesterday, not where they cleared in the last 3 years, because that's very skewing. You should know where they're trading for the next 3 years, because that market is going to tell you what they're worth, not what they past performance is no indicator of the future outcome, right? Most people, I don't know why they don't think about that. And like, I've had developers even here at Catalyst try to sell me projects or bring us in as partners and say, hey, here's my Veeder view. Here's the LMP. I'm like, where'd you get that price from? That's like $75. And like zone H power is worth 40 for the next 5 years. Like, where'd you get that from? And like, well, that's where it cleared for the last 3 years. I'm like, cool. Like 3 years ago, we had the Ukraine war, we had $10 gas. Like, that's not applicable. That's not what the futures market is. You have to use the market because it's smarter than the 3 years of history that you've been using. And they're like, oh, crud, that's not going to work. And my deal's blowing up now. I'm like, cool. You have to understand that futures markets for power, for all these things, like, are interrelated with one another. Even like I have an Ameren community solar project that I'm working on right now. We have an interconnection that we're signing. Like, I'm looking at what I will get paid for my bill credits, and it's based upon the Ameren price to compare, which is based upon wholesale power markets and capacity markets in MISO. It's different than PJM. This big PJM capacity blow up didn't impact the MISO capacity markets directly. So like, you have to like understand these dynamics. And my view there is conservative, and my development partners like reflecting this huge spike that everyone's talking about. I'm like, cool, that's in the other part of Illinois, in the PJM part. This is the MISO part. They're not the same thing. Yes, they tug on each other, but they're not the same thing. So that interrelated aspect of all of these markets is, I think it's going to keep us out of trouble here at Catalyst, but also maybe get us into some trouble too.
For sure. I mean, as you know, it's so hard to predict the markets and things are constantly changing. But I think your knowledge, I mean, you're a lot sophisticated developer than the typical, developer. They don't really understand like power markets as intimately as you do. And it's interesting. Are you seeing like more energy storage for commercial industrial uses? The challenge is something that you mentioned before. Like, yes, the SMART program has for solar plus storage, but a lot of markets, it's hard to get a long-term hedge from a financing perspective. So I wanted to get your perspective on if you're seeing energy storage being used for the CNI customer at this point.
I'm making this face, which you all can't see on the podcast. I'm sorry, because this is my biggest source of frustration right now. We serve load, right? So we're financially responsible when we're in contract with a customer for every aspect of what they consume when they consume it, including their capacity. And if I can change the shape of their consumption, like when they consume it, not the quantity, but just when, I'm directly exposed to the financial benefit, a catalyst of reducing their capacity costs.
Yeah.
And even with that really unique positioning as a storage developer for CNI customers, I'm struggling to make it work.
Mhm.
I just cannot. There's a few spots, Eastern Mass, like downstate New York, with these new storage incentives that are hopefully going to be enshrined, shortly, like where I might be able to make it work. I think I maybe could even do it in upstate New York with a cheap enough lease. And we've been fortunate enough to have some cheaper leases inked because the land was truly stranded for any other purpose. And we happen to be close enough to interconnection that the upgrades would be minimal. That's like a very unique circumstance, not typical. I don't think largely CNI storage is set up for success right now. And if anyone should be able to do it, it's us, because of our, current position as supplier to the same customer. It doesn't work. The cost to deploy batteries, to buy the equipment, and then to maintain them is just too high relative to the value as a power market participant. The peak off peak spread is too low to make that work. So I don't know why everybody uses the word arbitrage to describe that. It's not, but the energy market optimization value is not significant enough, and the reduction in capacity exposure is not big enough yet I think it's going to change. I mean, you see this capacity clear in PJM. It's 5x the prior year. We'll see what the next auction does in a few months. If that's the trend, and if that's due to coal closures and data center demand increases, even if that's all offset by an economic recession, which, thanks to tariffs, we'll probably have shortly, I still believe that we're going to have a strong capacity market for quite some time. And, people will build assets into that. And I hope that storage starts to work better into that. I hope prices come down. Tariffs are not going to help that. I hope that interconnection costs come down. Tariffs and utility constraints are not going to help that either. So a lot of counteracting forces here, a lot of hope and fingers crossed. I will continue to spend time on storage because I think it's infinitely valuable for the future of the energy transition. Like, can't ignore it. I'm not going to stick my head in the sand there, but I haven't been able to make it work yet, except for a few choice opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's great perspective, and obviously, hopefully, yeah, there's a lot of different factors impacting it, but, we're seeing the same cost declines in PV panels that we're seeing in energy storage. And as we get more production onshore, or so that won't be obviously impacted as much with tariffs. So we'll see. That's a great point, Gabe. I think also too, the Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship. You started, I think, GP Renewables in what was it, 2010?
Yeah.
And then you sold the company, and then now you have Catalyst Power, and there's a lot of exciting things that we're not going to talk about during the interview that's happening. Can you talk about what advice would you give entrepreneurs in the energy industry? Now you've been doing it for 15 years and you've seen so much, it would be great if you could impart your advice.
I think that diversification of a business, not just in energy, but any entrepreneurial venture that you're taking on is really important. You got to think about what could change in the landscape of the market that you're trying to focus on and how will you make it when that change happens. And so I think we're on the solar coaster, right? Even though solar is definitely a focus for our project development business, I knew that this, could become more difficult. I also knew that individual states have incentives that show up and then get depleted and then come back again. And so geographic diversification was important to me to reduce that risk. And then technology diversification was also important to me. I mean, I do have one risk that I can't get rid of, which is they fully regulate the energy markets and they make everything a monopoly again. All right, we're all screwed. So nothing I can do about that. But if they don't do that, short of that, I think diversifying your business, whether it's energy or something else, making sure that if you think something could go wrong, and if it does, what are you going to do? Are you going to have a business that's viable, and how you might protect yourself against that is very valuable when you're thinking about your downside risk. You don't have to be able to deal with it immediately, but you need to have the ability to pivot, which means you have to have flexible capital that understands that pivots will happen. That means you have to have, sort of the presence of mind to see when it's happening, not be married, to a choice that you made. Don't be married to a position, and then also make decisions, I guess the right word is a little ruthlessly, and do it with imperfect amounts of information all the time. You can't always know everything about the market that you're in, but you can certainly size up the big trends and what changed today. What's the marginal piece of information and be reactive to that. And yeah, even owning a business is also like a trade. Somebody may overvalue it at some point, in which case you should exit. And
Yeah.
I mean, if they undervalue it for a while and you like it better, you should stick with it, and stick with it and grow it. And so I've been opportunistic on both sides of that. Here at Catalyst, we've done, 5 acquisitions, 7 if you include the cogen plants that we bought in the last 2 years. And, we've sold some stuff. We bought some stuff. I sold a company. I think you just have to kind of be nimble and opportunistic and view things not get married to any one thing that you're doing.
Yeah, that is great advice. I appreciate your advice, and I think our listeners, who we call Mavericks, would find it really helpful. This has been an amazing interview, Gabe. I appreciate your time today. If our audience would like to learn more about Catalyst Power or you, what's the best way that they could do that?
Catalystpower.com. There's a contact us, and there's a human on the other side, I promise. No AI bots over here. So you'll get a call from somebody on our team, and I'm happy to talk to customers. I try to make time to speak to our customers as much as I can also, because I learn a lot every time I do that. So anyone who wants to be a customer or partner, referral, development partner, listeners here, I'm sure are deeply involved in development. We need more partners because rising tides lift all boats. And if I can help you in some way, then that's better for me in the long run.
Yeah, that is a great way to end the interview. We'll have it on the notes in the podcast as well. Gabe, this has been really helpful. I mean, there's been a lot of great insights, and I wish you continued success. And I'm curious to see what happens with Catalyst Power and the amazing work that you guys are doing there. So thank you.
Benoy. This has been super fun. Thank you.
Oh, anytime. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Renew Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@renewenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.